The arrival of the Garda should have brought answers, clarity to the unsettling discovery. But the official investigation into this seminary cellar incident, as it was referred to in the sparse press releases, seemed to hit a wall almost immediately. The initial forensic reports, which I managed to obtain through persistent digging in the National Archives in Dublin, were surprisingly inconclusive. They confirmed the skulls were human, dating roughly between the mid-19th and early 20th centuries. However, there was no evidence of trauma, no clear cause of death identified. The seminary itself offered little explanation. The priests who were serving in 1955 claimed to have no knowledge of the cellar's contents. The older records of the seminary, supposedly detailing its history and any unusual events, were incomplete. Several key volumes were missing, particularly those covering the period that the skulls were estimated to be from. It was as if a deliberate effort had been made to erase a certain chapter of St. Finian's past. Frustrated by the lack of official information, I turned my attention to the local community. But here I encountered a wall of silence, thicker and more impenetrable than the seminary's stone walls. The discovery of the skulls was a deeply unsettling event for the people of County Galway, a stain on the reputation of a beloved institution. Many were reluctant to speak about it, their memories clouded by time and perhaps by a conscious desire to forget. Yet, in the dimly lit corners of local pubs and the hushed conversations with the older inhabitants, fragments of stories began to emerge. Whispers of unusual illnesses that swept through the seminary in the late 1800s, of students and even some of the clergy falling victim to a strange wasting sickness. Some spoke of secretive burials within the seminary grounds, unmarked graves hidden away from public view. One elderly woman, whose grandfather had worked as groundskeeper at the seminary, recounted a chilling tale passed down through her family. She spoke of a fever that took many young men too quickly, their bodies left gaunt and their eyes vacant. She claimed her grandfather had witnessed carts being loaded with shrouded figures late at night, taken to a part of the seminary grounds that was strictly off-limits. These fragmented accounts, though lacking concrete proof, began to paint a disturbing picture. Could the 113 skulls be the remains of these forgotten victims? Were they not given proper burials, but instead, simply discarded in the darkness of the seminary cellar? And if so, why the secrecy? What was the nature of this illness that claimed so many young lives? My search for answers led me to an old, forgotten archive in a neighboring town, where I unearthed a collection of personal letters written by a former student of St. Finian's Seminary during the late 19th century. Letters that hint at something far more sinister than a simple outbreak of disease. The year is 1955. The place, a small, isolated parish nestled deep within the rugged landscape of County Galway, Ireland. Life here moved at the gentle pace of the seasons, dictated by the rhythms of farming and the unwavering presence of the local church. At its heart stood St. Finian's Seminary, a venerable institution that had served the community for generations, training young men for the priesthood. It was a place of quiet contemplation, discipline, and deep-rooted faith, until the silence was shattered by a discovery that would forever stain its hallowed halls. The details initially were scarce, almost whispered amongst the tight-knit community. A routine inspection, some structural concerns in the old cellar beneath the seminary's west wing, and then the unimaginable. 113 human skulls, piled haphazardly as if discarded. Not the orderly remains of a long-forgotten graveyard, but something far more disturbing, more recent. The local Garda Síochána were called in, of course. The news rippled through the small parish like a shockwave, turning familiar faces pale with disbelief and fear. St. Finian's, a place of reverence and trust, was now the epicenter of a macabre mystery. How could such a thing be possible? Who were these individuals? And why were their remains hidden in the darkness beneath the seminary? The initial reaction was one of stunned silence, followed by a flurry of speculation and rumor. Some whispered of ancient pagan rituals, of curses long dormant. Others, more grounded in their faith, struggled to reconcile this horror with the image of the pious men who walked the seminary's corridors. The local priest, Father Michael, a kind and gentle soul, could offer little comfort, his own face etched with bewilderment and a profound sense of unease. As an independent researcher with an interest in forgotten histories, I first came across this case years ago in a dusty archive. The official reports were frustratingly brief, offering no concrete answers. The investigation, it seemed, had stalled, the truth buried beneath layers of official silence and community reluctance to speak of the unspeakable. But the sheer number, 113, it lingered in my mind. A haunting figure that begged for an explanation. And so, I've come to County Galway, determined to unearth the truth behind the harrowing discovery in the cellar of St. Finian's Seminary. What I've found so far is more unsettling than I could have ever imagined. The letters were penned by a young man named Eamon O'Malley, who entered St. Finian's Seminary with fervent aspirations of joining the priesthood in the late 1880s. Initially, his correspondence with his family back in a neighboring village spoke of rigorous studies, the camaraderie of his fellow students, and the inspiring sermons of the seminary's rector, Father Sean. But as the months turned into years, a subtle shift occurred in Eamon's tone. A creeping unease began to permeate his words. The first hints of trouble appeared in the winter of 1892. Eamon wrote of a great sickness that had swept through the seminary, claiming the lives of several students with alarming speed. He described a persistent fever, followed by a strange listlessness and a disturbing lack of appetite. But it was his later descriptions that truly chilled me. He wrote of the afflicted becoming unusually docile, their eyes glazed over and vacant, as if their very spirits had departed. As the illness continued to spread, Eamon's letters became increasingly frantic. He spoke of hushed prayers and secret gatherings amongst the remaining students, a palpable fear gripping the seminary walls. He recounted witnessing strange rituals performed by Father Sean in the dead of night, involving chanting in Latin and the laying of hands on the foreheads of the afflicted. These weren't the comforting ministrations of a shepherd tending to his flock. There was a sense of desperation, of battling something unseen and deeply feared. One particularly disturbing letter, dated October 1893, sent shivers down my spine. Eamon described how the afflicted, even those who had been bedridden for weeks, would sometimes rise in unison, their movements strangely coordinated, their vacant eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance. He wrote of a whispered rumor among the students, that those who succumbed to the sickness were not truly dead but changed. He even used the chilling phrase, "They walk but they are not among us." The final letter in the collection, dated just weeks before Eamon himself seemingly succumbed to the same illness, contained a truly horrifying revelation. He wrote of witnessing Father Sean and other members of the clergy secretly carrying bodies down to the old cellar beneath the west wing, the very cellar where the 113 skulls were discovered. He described them not as burials but as a means of containment, a way to hide those who had been irrevocably altered by the sickness, those who were deemed no longer fit for a Christian burial within the consecrated ground. Eamon's final, barely legible words on that last page hinted at his own growing fear that he too was succumbing to the change. He wrote of feeling a coldness spreading through him, a growing detachment from the world around him. The letters abruptly end mid-sentence, the final words a chilling question, "Am I next to be led down?" The pieces of the puzzle begin to coalesce into a terrifying picture. The great sickness that swept through St. Finian's Seminary in the late 19th century, as described in Brother Eamon's letters, was no ordinary illness. It was a disease that seemed to strip its victims of their very humanity, leaving them docile, vacant, and ultimately, deemed unfit for proper burial. The 113 skulls discovered in the seminary cellar were likely the remains of those young men, hidden away in the darkness, their existence a shameful secret the Church desperately wanted to conceal. The exact nature of this affliction remains shrouded in mystery. Was it a highly contagious and unusually aggressive strain of a known disease? Or was it something more insidious? The descriptions of the coordinated movements and the feeling of the afflicted being not among us hint at something beyond the realm of conventional medicine. Could it have been a form of mass hysteria fueled by religious fervor and the isolated environment of the seminary? Or something darker, a spiritual or psychological contagion that irrevocably altered those it touched? Father Sean's desperate rituals and the secretive disposal of the bodies in the cellar suggest a profound fear, a belief that they were dealing with something beyond their spiritual guidance. Perhaps they believed the afflicted were possessed, or that their illness was a divine punishment best hidden from the outside world to avoid scandal and doubt. The sheer number of victims, 113, speaks to the scale of this tragedy and the lengths to which the seminary went to conceal it. Official silence that followed the discovery in 1955 is perhaps the most telling piece of the puzzle. The lack of thorough investigation, the missing records, the community's reluctance to speak, all point to a collective desire to keep this dark chapter of St. Finian's history buried. The unmarked earth beneath the seminary likely holds more secrets, more untold stories of young men whose lives were tragically cut short by a mysterious and terrifying ailment. The harrowing discovery in the cellar of St. Finian's Seminary remains largely forgotten, a chilling footnote in the history of County Galway. But the questions linger. What truly happened within those walls? What was the nature of the sickness that claimed so many lives and led to such a disturbing act of concealment? And in a world where the lines between science, religion, and the unknown can often blur, how many other such secrets lie hidden, waiting to be unearthed? Have you ever heard whispers of St. Finian's? What do you make of this century-old mystery?